Hello and welcome back to another episode of Freedom Revamp the podcast. I'm your host, Deshawn, and today I am joined by Danielle Smith of You Better Grow Girl. Say hello to everyone.
Hi, everybody. I am thankful to be with Deshawn today on Freedom Revamp. Thank you for having me.
We're so excited to have you. So before we move forward into our conversation, I just wanted to have you expound a little bit on what it is that you do.
So, I am a personal development coach. I'm also a freelance writer and a copywriter. So, within the personal development realm, I work with Black and Brown women and I teach them how to alchemize their pain into power to maximize their mind, optimize their gifts, and create a life they deserve.
I love that. I think that taking those things that we experience and flipping them into something better is amazing. You specifically said taking pain and purpose, and I love that.
Yeah, it's important.
Very important. So before we move further into our conversation, we always ask our guests, what does freedom mean to you?
Freedom to me, well, it means a lot of things, but I'd say, like, most importantly, it's the ability to control or have dominion over the thoughts that I allow to live rent free in my mind. So I need to be free to think on my own, not pressured or conditioned or kind of like forming my opinions off of what's going on outside in the worlds around me. I like to be independent in my thinking because I think that that kind of affects my freedoms in every other area.
Definitely. I
Even
would
if
agree.
I find, like, even if you're, sorry to interrupt, I find even if you're shackled, even like in the Bible or in real life, like physically, if you feel stuck, so long as your mind is free, you can look for an opportunity to move forward.
I would agree. I think freeing your mind is the first step toward freedom, specifically for me. Back in college, I was studying theater, and one of my projects was on freeing our minds in order to perform, because oftentimes we're stuck in our minds, worried about lines or worried about what people think, and we don't offer an authentic performance. So that was one of the main things that I discussed in that project, and it was very enlightening to see how shackled we can be by our minds in just everyday circumstances and not just when it comes to being on the stage or behind the camera.
Yeah, and then it shows up in other areas of our life.
Yes, because it's very easy to be influenced by your thoughts to make certain decisions or to perform in a certain way when you're in certain environments.
For sure.
So, our founder talks about this concept of practicing freedom. So, you just define freedom for yourself. And now I want to know how
Mhm.
you go about practicing freedom, whether it be on a daily or weekly basis.
I think that writing is my practicing freedom. That's my freedom of speech. And that's also how I share my thoughts, my very unfiltered, opinionated thoughts. And I ensure that whatever platform I'm working with or writing for allows me that freedom so that I don't have to code switch or speak to opinions that aren't really relevant or true to my truth. Um, and I also find that even if, like, I'm just writing for myself in a journal, it's very freeing to release those emotions and not necessarily have an audience critique them or hear them or have any feedback in a conversation. It's just me and myself and my thoughts. So I'd say that that's probably how I express my freedoms in my day-to-day life.
Me as well. I spend a lot of time writing in my journal or sometimes even having conversations with myself just so that I can get out my feelings without having a biased party present. Because sometimes we, like you said, we do code switch, we do filter the way in which we truly feel for
Mhm.
others. Even in conversations, sometimes with friends, I'll find myself not telling the whole truth
Yeah.
because I don't know if they're going to judge me. And then I'll like come to a place where I'm like, no, I know that this is an unbiased party. I know that they won't judge me. I can give them how I'm truly feeling. So it's definitely important to spend time in self reflection and alone, whether it be in your journal, like you said, or writing, so that you have an opportunity to truly feel um, and go through those emotions. Which brings us to today's topic. Today we will be discussing emotional intelligence. So I think this is a conversation that we've already had before with another guest, but every time we visit these topics, there's new questions that come up. Um, and there's always new thoughts because you're someone new with a different life experiences. So I want to know first, how would you define emotional intelligence?
So I'm not going to use like any industry jargon. Emotional intelligence is really, to me, being aware of your emotions, understanding how to redirect them, knowing that you have the power to redirect them, and then being able to follow through on that so that it doesn't interrupt your progress, self sabotage, have you operating off of impulse, and getting in the way of your opportunities and your growth.
Yeah, so one of the main things you said there is being in tune with your emotions, which leads to the next question, which I kind of want to answer with you because this is something that it's very important to me. Self awareness and self reflection is so important to my personal growth.
Yeah.
It's been very pivotal in pulling myself out of self sabotage, finding myself more self motivated
Mm-hmm.
because I was able to reflect on the things that were keeping me bound, or I was able to reflect on the aspects of myself that I might not have been too fond of, look them in the face, and then figure out how to resolve them,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
So that leads to the next question of how do we manage to get in tune with these emotions? What are some ways that you have done so, whether it be tools or tips that you want to share with our listeners on how to really tap in and get in tune with your emotions?
So the first one that I always recommend, I have no affiliation with the creator of it, but I swear by the product, is a disc profile. So that's something that I started doing when I was working in my day jobs, working in real estate. They all My positions allowed me to work really really closely with whoever I was supporting. So they would always tell me to take one of these disc profiles prior to interviewing with a team, so you ensure that your personality is a good match. Now I started doing them for myself because they're like 40 pages long and they tell you how you operate in certain environments, which areas you thrive in most, which areas you won't do as well in, what you need to be motivated. Um, your adjusted personality under pressure. Like, these are things that naturally I don't think I would have identified. And if I had identified them on my own, again, my perspective is biased. So it's a test you
Yes.
fill out, maybe like, I don't know, it takes, I don't know, 30 minutes. You fill out a bunch of questions. I'll ask you to um, evaluate a bunch of adjectives and see how they relate to you, or scenarios. And then at the end, you get this report. So that's number one. I think that's critical for self awareness, because once you have that, I feel like you kind of have the blueprint to who you are in this season. I've done them periodically and they change based on
They
my
do, yes.
personality changing. But I still love how thorough it is. And I find that it's a read that I'm not going to get from a biased friend, a biased family member, somebody that already knows me, might have personal experiences with me that affect their opinion. It's very unfiltered. So that's number one. There are like tons of personality tests similar to that. I just did the 16 personality test. There's an Enneagram, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So there's a few of those. I think that's an amazing tool to use. Outside of the tools, I recommend spending a lot of time alone. So whether that looks like dating yourself or carving out time when you have some quiet time during the week so you can reconnect with self every single week, I think that's imperative. If you can do it every day, that's awesome. Just because social media is loud. Our lives can be loud with the opinions of others. And I think that the more time we take to ourselves, the more we get to hear our own voices and be in tune with what's going on in the moment. So something might have happened that threw you off that week. If you go into the next week without stopping and evaluating and assessing what happened, how are you feeling, why are you feeling this way, you're going to drag that
Yeah.
energy into the next week and into the next week and the next week, and then it continues until it manifests and maybe burnout. And then at that point, now you're forced to face things face to face. So carving in that time blocking, is, I'd say, the other thing separate from the tools that was most critical in my raising my self awareness.
I agree. I was in college when I first took the DIS test, and we specifically took it as a board. I was on the board of the African American Student Alliance.
Mm,
And in order for us to work together, we needed to take the
yep.
test to kind of figure out how we would work within the setting because it was a full academic year. That's two full semesters that we were within this job because it was a job. We were paid to be the leaders of this organization, so we had to make sure that we functioned as a well-oiled machine. So we took that test, and I remember thinking like, oh wow, there were things that came up that I didn't necessarily agree with, but it was true. It was just facing
Yeah.
those things that I didn't agree with. Like, wow, that's something that I really do need from people. Like it was area. I think one of the specific things that kind of shocked me was the need for validation.
Okay.
And that it kind of hurt my pride because obviously you don't want to think that you need validation.
Yeah.
But that was when I first realized that I was somewhat addicted to academia. Like I knew that if I went to school and I got good
Mm-hmm.
grades, I was going to be fine. Like there was going to be praise for that. I was going to get on the president's list, or I was going to get on the dean's list, or whatever the case may be. And I knew that there was reward for that.
For sure.
Then, you graduate, and I've talked about this with other guests. You graduate, and there's kind of like this moment of, I no longer have that validation from or affirmation from academia. Like, there's no one to pat me on the back when I get a good grade on an assignment, or to give me an 100 when I, commit to making sure that my project is thorough. Like, there's no one to do that
Yeah.
anymore. You have to create that for yourself in life. So I think that's where it got a little bit tricky for me specifically with my emotional intelligence and tapping into who I was, because I had to step outside of that trait specifically. Like, there is no one to validate or affirm me in life but myself.
I think.
There are ways in which you can seek validation and affirmation, or, we're a
Yeah.
framework of
Yeah.
that. You think about all these arenas. Musical artists are striving for Grammys, actors are striving for Oscars. So there's all these places and arenas where we seek validation and affirmation, but needing less of that was something that I worked through, to be where I am now. Like, I no longer need that from anyone because I feel it spiritually. I'm spiritually affirmed and validated when I recognize who I am in God, and I recognize the power that I have in Him. I
Yep.
no longer need anyone else to tell me, "Oh, you're doing a good job," or "Oh, that was great." Because 9 times out of 10, it's not all of my own doing. It's God that's assisting me. So that was another thing that, through
Mm.
spiritual realization, I was like, wow, I was wanting for people to praise me when it's not me that was doing these things. The reason why I was so good in school was because God gave me the mind to and the capacity to do so. He gave me the firmer and the drive to push and make sure that I was doing above average. So realizing that too was something that took me out of myself, and that self-awareness is what really tapped me into being so adamant about self-reflection. Like, if that was something that I found that I didn't like, what other things can I find that I don't like, and not necessarily fix, but work through, understand, and make for a better me?
I think that it's.
So I love that you brought that
I
up.
think that is important when you begin doing any self work. If you really want it to work, is removing the ego. So you that realization where you realize, okay, this is me needing praise. Um, and the fact that you're resistant to it because you're like, hey, that's not actually true, that's not how I really feel, that's the ego, I think, that could have stood in the way of you doing the work, because you could have stopped at that point and said, this test is wrong, I know myself better, I know what works for me, and ignored it. But you're definitely going to have your ego attacked when you start to do this work, whether you work with a therapist or any specialist, or take any, like, this is a new realm that you're getting into, a whole new world, and it's work that you haven't done before. So you're definitely going to be confronted with things that make you feel uncomfortable, because this is yourself. Like, you feel like you know yourself
Yeah.
best. Like, who can read me better than me? But I think it's really imperative that you remove the ego. I read an amazing book called Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. That's
Mm.
amazing, for self-awareness, because I don't think that you should remove that need for validation or approval. It's not really, validation, I would say maybe positive affirmation. I think that you should just maybe seek
Yes.
spaces, that are conducive to that, and or create those experiences on your own, so you don't feel as if you're lacking. There's nothing wrong with wanting to hear you're doing a good job, especially if you're a high achiever. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So whether that looks like you encouraging yourself in your journal, and knowing that
Yes.
that's what you need to thrive, you want to know. I think it's more so just the feedback, like, am I doing a good job or not, is what you want, because I resonate with that. I need that feedback to know how well I'm doing, so that I can continue doing a good job. So you just have to curate spaces and events, and experiences that will give you a fuller life and that match what you need to feel fulfilled.
I agree. I think another thing that I do to myself, and I don't know, do to myself is beat up on myself a little bit about the way that I feel, but then I'll talk to my friends and I'll be like, be easy on yourself in that area.
Yeah,
Like, understand why you're feeling that way. And the older I got, the more I was able to snap out of that. So I am a little less
for
hard on
sure.
myself, and I'll look at my journals and things that I wrote, and I'll understand why I feel the way that I feel. And I will sit in
Yeah.
those feelings as opposed to running
Hmm.
away from them, because one thing that I think we are conditioned to do is, life goes on, or, don't, a lot of people don't condone the idea of vulnerability, like really feeling the things that go on
Yeah,
around
it's
you.
fight or flight.
Like,
That's a term that I got familiar with. So it's like when you're in a sticky situation, your subconscious mind or whatever your mind is thinking, am I going to fight or am I going to take flight? And depending on how hard the situation is and what you believe the risks are, and the possible outcome, that's how you determine whether or not you're going to fight this thing head on or if you're going to run from it. And vulnerability seems pointless, to somebody that is not aware of how their actions are affecting their life. You have to become aware before you can say, okay, yeah, I'm gonna tackle this thing head on. There are some people that are completely oblivious and they're fine with it, and they're just like, well, maybe everyone just really doesn't like me, it's not me. So that's where self-awareness comes into play, because once you understand where you're lacking, it's not that you have to be vulnerable with everybody, you have to be vulnerable with yourself. And I don't think that's scary or to be frowned upon, because you're the only constant in your life. um, in our community, in the Black community, I think that we might be resistant to vulnerability, just because we're forced to fight, in our daily lives and the workplace.
so
And when
often,
we
yeah.
do show that human, I wouldn't say weaker, but that softer side, it might be taken advantage of. But I think that we have to be conscious of who we're vulnerable around. Brene Brown is an amazing vulnerability expert. She has YouTube videos, books, etc., etc. But you're not just going to open up and tell everybody, hey, do you know that I suffer with this, that, and that, and I'm working on that? No, because it might be taken advantage of in that space. So you might let your parents know, or you might let your girlfriends know, okay, these are the things that I'm working on right now, or what I'm working through. Can you hold space for me? um, Versus expecting your social media feed to understand with 5,000 followers. So, time and place.
No, definitely. I would totally agree, because I think one of the things too that helped me through my space was at the time in which I was really tapping into self reflection, and I was finding these things about myself, some things that I was absolutely in love with and that I wanted to work to continue to foster, and
For
things that I
sure.
wasn't and that I wanted to work on. I had a very strong sisterhood. My friends are not just like the women who are really close to me in my life. They're my sisters and my family. I refer to them as such because how um that's how they make me feel when I'm
Yeah.
with them. They're very they enter spaces with me without judgment. And even though, like I said before, there's sometimes when I feel a certain type of way that they might not have been making
Mm-hmm.
me feel, but it that was something that I was, going on with insecurities within myself. Like, I don't want for people to see me like this. And then it was like, yeah, but I need somebody to see me like this for me to get
Yeah.
through it. So that's another part of emotional intelligence. Like, it's not about um, showing signs of weakness or anything. And I think it's better to say, hey, you know, I am being vulnerable in this moment as opposed to weak. Sometimes vulnerability sounds better than weak to people, but there is a space where you might just be weak and you might really need help from someone else. And if you don't truly and authentically express that need, then no one can help you. And then now you're setting yourself up for self sabotage, like you mentioned earlier. Because so often, the biggest thing here is, now that I go back to it, is the
Yeah.
ego.
I don't even want to
When
go this
your ego
extreme
can
with it,
bruise
but
you.
I'm always thinking of what happens if you, or like whenever somebody, like a celebrity commits suicide and it's like a really hot topic, or a popular topic, I should
Oh
say,
yeah.
in the news, I'm always thinking of why they didn't feel that they had somebody in their corner that they could open up to, and how that situation could have been prevented, the death could have been prevented, if they felt comfortable with at least one person to open up and say, hey, I'm struggling right now. And then also when it's over, there's always a million people that are like, I had no idea, I'm her best friend, I'm her sister. So I'm always
Mm.
conscious of that when, people are resistant to being open and, attacking things head on and or asking for help. I had a really, interesting journey with mental health, and my, inability to ask for help. So I think it's really important that you find people that you can be open with, if even that is a therapist or a social worker, somebody who you can turn to, and your support team. I remember when I was in the hospital dealing with my mental health, they had asked me, when you're discharged, who are you going to be speaking to? Like, who's your support system? What does that look like? And that was the first time I'd even given that consideration, because I was so self-sufficient. So I think it's critical that you have people in your corner that are for you, 100% for you. And you can keep it real with them, and they can keep it real with you.
I agree. I think for me too, like you mentioned there was so much time that I spent not asking for help when I genuinely needed help that I kind of drug myself into a place that I was like, I have to get out of here. I was battling with depression and
Yeah.
anxiety, and it was something that I had never
Mm-hmm.
experienced before. And I didn't, so there's this aspect of understanding the feelings and not being able to express those to others. Like people would ask me, what's
You
wrong with
don't
you? And
know.
I really
Yeah.
could not answer.
Yeah.
I don't know. Because you go from this really extreme high to this
Mm-hmm.
really extreme low in a matter of seconds, and there's no explanation for why I feel the way that I feel. It's just all I can explain
Yeah.
is where
And
I'm
in
at right
taking
now,
that time,
what I'm feeling right
to
now.
evaluate, whether it's through a journal or whatever, just having that evaluation every time, I think can kind of combat that, because it's, you don't know why you feel the way you feel, because everything happened so quickly and you didn't take the time to process. So there's always that one um, incident or whatever, that trigger that kind of sets you off. But taking the time to evaluate on a regular basis can help you say, you know what, I actually do feel like crap, because my aunt came over and I really respect her opinion, and she thought this about what I'm working on, and I'm still thinking about it 2 weeks later, versus I just feel like crap and I don't know why, because there's always a reason for the way we feel.
Definitely. I had to pay
Yeah,
attention to those triggers. And I am a person who writes everything down. Every day when I go to work, I make a to-do list and I like scratching things off.
me too.
I write everything down. And it's just
Yeah.
because I like to see it in front of me. I don't know. It's a very
No,
oddly
I actually,
satisfying
I
thing
love
for me
it.
to check something off my
If
to-do
something
list.
is not on the checklist, I
I
might
love it.
actually add it to the checklist for the satisfaction of saying, okay, it's done, and checking it off. I completely understand. It's a high achiever, a high
It's
achiever
really
thing.
small things. Like it'll be like, I'm gonna online shop today. Put it on my list,
You want to
check it off. Like
visualize the
little things.
goals.
But for me, I you have
Yeah.
sometimes you have to see it. So for me, that was the thing. That was what journaling. That's how journaling set me free. Putting it down on paper and seeing it. And then even if in the moment that I was journaling it, I wasn't paying attention to what was going on, and then I came back and turned to that
Yeah.
page and saw it,
Mm-hmm,
it
mm-hmm.
made sense. So the more I understood that, my biggest issue with depression and anxiety, oddly enough, was financial stability fresh out of college. I was at a point where, you have all these ideas
Mm-hmm,
of what
mm-hmm.
life is going to look like
Disappointment.
and where you're going to be working, and then you're quickly disappointed when those jobs are like, you need 2 years of experience, and you didn't get an opportunity to get that experience, and you need
Yeah,
that
the
experience from
reality
this job.
versus your
um,
expectation.
or and I've always been good at getting jobs. I can get a job, but I always felt like those jobs were just enough for me to get by and not enough for me to live comfortably. So that was another thing too that was driving me nuts, that I was working so hard and then making just enough to
Yeah.
pay my bills and kind of do things that made me happy. So I had to get to a place where, after understanding that was my biggest thing, not checking my bank account as often. Like that's not
Yeah.
healthy for me to do. Like pay
And
my bills
it's a
and leave it
very
alone.
simple
And just
paradigm shift that kind of lightened the load, or allowed you to see things from a different perspective. It's understanding that, okay, this is the reality, this is what I expected, and yes, I know that this is what I'm capable of, but this is the reality, and that doesn't mean that I'm any less qualified, or that I'm not eventually going to be in a place where I am financially stable, or ending up in the position that I'm going to have. But it's just that simple thought, switching that thought that you hold in your mind about the situation, that kind of changes things. And that to me is like emotional intelligence 101, because you can like think yourself into a depression um
oh my
on
gosh,
based off of
yes.
feelings,
Our
with
brains
no
are so
facts.
powerful. Oh my God, they're so
No facts,
powerful.
just vibes.
Yes, and that's the thing, and that's the scary part of it. It
Yeah.
can be one moment,
Yeah.
one small thing, and I think that's the thing that upset me the most about dealing and battling with anxiety is it would be
Yeah, it always
little
is.
things, and then the little trigger I would write in my journal, and later I would go back and laugh at it because I'd be like, oh my God, that was not that big of a deal, but it
You want to
sent
know
me in a
one that I just
spiral.
discovered about myself? There's
Go
one thing that
deeper.
used to really irritate me when I was working in my like my 9 to 5 job. So it's really corporate. They're super official and professional, super dry. So I would get really irritated as a female in like a male dominated industry if I wasn't addressed by my name. In an email or a text or any correspondence, if it was just like a hey, and they immediately got into the message, or if there wasn't any greeting at all, if there was no hi, good morning, like I hated being woken up that way. Like I just get into work and it's just you're piling tasks at me. And now at the level that I am at in my business, I understand that sometimes we are busy and just get to the point. But because of where I was with my emotions, I would internalize that as they don't respect me. I'm not valued. Um, and my reaction would be, okay, I'm ready to quit. I'm going to leave. That I don't feel valued in this place. And it was such impulsive behavior on my part because I hadn't checked my emotions and um, dealt with what I had to deal with that was causing me to feel that way. But it's like you said, it's always super small, tiny things. Like that minor thing could throw me off for the entire day. And it was like, okay, now I'm going to have a little bit of attitude when I talk to you because you had a little bit of attitude and you spoke to me. And it's those little things that can just
Yeah,
snowball. And you look back at it and you're like, that was so stupid. Like that was so minor. That was spilt milk. But it's your mindset. It's your mindset.
definitely. And I mean, and that's what I was gonna say. And it's in your it's what you
Yep.
just it's
Yep.
what you decided. I think that's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
When you decide on
Yep.
something, then that's it. You know. And for me, so I mean, I guess I hate to say it this way, but I've worked a bunch of seemingly dead end jobs. And what I mean by that is jobs that I didn't
Yeah.
plan on like growing in because they're not connected to my purpose. They were just jobs
Yep.
that were
Yep.
taking care of my bills. So it was more so from a place of like needing to survive. These are the jobs that I took on. And because of that, you get in environments where it's almost so hard to save face when things happen.
Yeah.
Like you said, the little things like I felt disrespected in the situation.
Yep.
I don't
Yep.
have to be here. I don't want to be here. Um, and oh my God, I was the queen of that. And that was because for a long time I was for the sake of my emotions, I didn't want to trade my
I
peace
completely
for
understand that.
like
Yeah.
sometimes I felt and sometimes that was a genuine feeling and now some of the times I look
If
back
you
and like I
reframed
could have
it and
stayed.
said, okay, well, you know what?
But there
This is
were,
getting me to my next
you
point, and
know,
I'm going to stick it out, and this doesn't really matter. And I can roll this off because on Friday, I have my self care, and on Sunday, I'm going to do my nails. So you can say what you want to me. So it's that mindset because that's us self sabotaging the journey.
it's reframing for sure. It's
Yeah.
definitely reframing and repurposing. So like being super transparent, where I'm at right now, I work in the leasing profession and I'm good
Hmm.
at it. I'm good at customer service. I, because I'm a human.
Yeah.
I'm really good at empathizing and sympathizing when necessary, and that's how I do so well in this profession. I'm also a people person because I'm an actor, so I know people very well, and I know how to maneuver in different situations. So I'm able to handle anyone
Yeah.
from the sweetest person to someone who's very irate because
Hmm.
I'm in tune with all of those things. So because of that, it's also very hard for me because I'm an empath.
Yes.
Sometimes I take on that energy. So I had to understand that my deepest frustration with my current situation is that I'm taking these
Yeah.
emotions with me when I leave. When I walk out and walk out of the
Yes.
door, leave it there. Like this is something that I just figured
Yeah.
out this week. Like leave that there. You clock out, you walk out, you leave it there. You don't have to
For
take
sure.
any of that with you. And that's when you lose freedom because my space of
For
freedom is
sure.
when I
For
walk out
sure.
of that door, when I'm at home, when I'm with myself. Like you said, self care when my nails done or taking myself to get ice cream because I love ice cream, especially sprinkles. But like whatever the case may be, like if I'm in those spaces, I don't want to take
Yeah.
all that negative
Boundaries.
energy with me there.
I think yeah, we didn't
I have
mention
to
that with
create
how to get in
boundaries.
tune, but
I
I think
have
it's
to.
critical. You figure out where your energy leaks are, and then you create the boundaries to protect them. So even if that's blocking your employer's number
Yes,
after 6 p.m. until
yes,
9 a.m., then that's what you do.
yes. And I feel like in just 2 days, like I already feel differently about a job that
That's
I planned
amazing.
on quitting this month. Like I was like, I'm not going back November. I'm not going back in November. But I know that I have goals and I know that this because I
Yeah.
thrive in this environment that I am in the most financially stable position I've ever been in. Like, I don't want to put myself in the place of having to start a search over because I'm frustrated, like you said,
Yeah,
in operating off of impulse. And although there have been several occurrences, it's also just
for
going
sure.
back and reframing those, like you said, repurpose them. Like, perfect example, I like to thrift, and there's a show that comes on called Flea Market Flip. And they literally go into a flea market and find things that look like trash and repurpose them into
Mm-hmm.
some of the most beautiful furniture pieces or um,
Yeah.
centerpieces in a home or whatever the case may be. So just taking, like, if we're using that as a metaphor, there are so many things in our life that come that are seemingly
Yeah.
trash and that are consuming and that have a
Mm-hmm.
huge effect on our emotions. But if we are able to repurpose those things,
I
or
agree.
just look at them differently, and
Yeah.
understand why we're going through those things too. Because I think that there's some situations where we might have dealt with people that we didn't, that might have
For
had a
sure.
huge tax on our emotion, right? And we're like,
Yeah.
I don't want to do this with this person, but we don't know
Yeah. What
what
we're being
lesson
prepared
that
for.
person is teaching us. Yeah, what we're being prepared for or why we need to deal with that. I'm an actor. I work in an industry that is very tough. So, very early on, when I was in high school, I had some teachers who would tell it like it was to us when we were kids. And back then, I can remember being with my
Yeah.
friends, like, I
Yeah.
can't believe they would say those things to us.
Yeah.
Like, we're only kids. Like, and then, like, then I get to college and I have one of my professors chew us out at our first rehearsal off book because she knew that
Mm-hmm.
majority of us were not very familiar with the lines, and then everybody is like upset, and
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, I was prepared for this. Like, I had already had a teacher to me about this previously. I'm ready. I know what I needed to do, and it's committing to it and not taking
Yes.
things personally sometimes, because I think that's so easy to do. It's like, this is about me. This is about me.
The
They're doing
Four
this
Agreements is
because they don't
another
like
book.
me. No, they're preparing me.
Yeah, they speak
Oh
to
my gosh, I have to read that.
Don Miguel Ruiz, I believe, is the
I
author.
have
He
to read
speaks to
that.
not taking things personally, and that advice in itself is such a game changer because as once you understand that concept, you will realize that everybody's dealing with stuff. Hurt people hurt other people, and it's a lot of the negative energy that we receive, whether it's comments, feedback, things that are done, shade, it's projection. So nothing more than somebody dumped their negativity on that person's plate and now they're projecting it onto yours. And if you don't know how to say, you know what, this isn't mine to take on, now you're going to take it on. And the cycle perpetuates of this negativity and this negative energy because nobody knew how to deal with their emotions and it's misplaced. So I think that that's really critical in not taking things personally because just because your boss said that you did a trash job today, it doesn't mean that that's a fact. It could be that maybe he had a terrible night prior to. So you say, you know what, I'm going to let this roll off my shoulder because this is not the usual feedback that I receive. I know that something might be going on there. And even if it isn't, that's okay because I'm confident in what I produce. I know that I didn't make any mistakes. And I'm not going to take this personally. So I think that's key.
I would say, I think too, we just have to understand why
Yeah,
we're dealing with other human beings. So if there are things that we do that we don't understand, how do we expect that there are
for
things
sure.
that
For
others are
sure.
doing that they don't quite
For sure.
understand? So they might be taking their anger, like you said, from the night prior out on you. And if you don't take it personal, then you understand that this person's not trying to harm
Yep.
me. They're just hurt right
Without getting
now,
caught up and
you
getting
know? So that's something
all
that's very
angry and
important to
wasting 30
understand.
minutes of your day and messing up on the next email and the cycle. So yeah, it's the awareness. That's why I say that's the biggest component to emotional intelligence is being aware of your emotions while they're going on and aware of your environment as well and what's happening and things that can affect your emotions.
So now that we've discussed all these avenues in which we've experienced it, and I want to say thank
No
you for your
problem.
vulnerability and sharing these things with our listeners because I'm sure there's someone saying me too right now. Um, but I want to know if you believe that one can have control over their emotions.
Yes, as a short answer. 110%. I believe in it. I believe that it takes work to get to that place. But I think that we
Okay.
definitely can and should have control over our emotions. Um, I think it's imperative because they're not facts. I feel like there are signs. Um, to communicate with us and let us know what's going on the inside, what we're feeling on the inside. But our feelings are not facts. That's something that one of my really favorite like online mentors, I guess I would say, my leak says all the time. They are not facts. Just like you said, you can't take things personally. So let's say somebody's feeling that you've done a really poor job in your XYZ. That's nothing more than their biased opinion based on that situation. That's not a fact. So if you allow that advice that you were given to guide you and control you and speak to your emotions and govern your decisions going forward, that's literally going to cripple your growth. So I think that not only can we have control of our emotions, but we should work towards it. It's imperative. I was actually Googling a few scriptures um, just to drive the point home, because I wanted to see what the Bible had to say about emotional intelligence. Here's one, Proverbs 19, verse 11. Good sense makes one slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook an offense. So just reading that scripture in itself is telling you how imperative and necessary it is for us to control our emotions, because you're not always going to want to feel like, you're not always going to be in the mood to maybe do your devotions. You're not always going to be in the mood to get your job done. You're not always going to be in the mood to cook, clean, things that you have to do like on a daily basis. You might not always be in the mood to get those things done, but if you allow that to govern you, your life is going to fall apart. That's just a fact.
Yeah, I love that. I love the way that that scripture
There were a
frames it
ton.
too,
There were a
because
ton.
we just literally talked about not taking things
Luke
like
7, verse
personal. We just talked
23.
about
Sorry
that.
to interrupt. Luke
So
7,
taking
verse
the
23 says, and blessed is the one who is not offended by me. So there are a ton of of verses that are speaking to us
yeah,
having control of our mind. Remember, Joyce Meyer said in one of her sermons, I hope I don't misquote her, but it was something along the lines of like, if you're always late, for example, or if you're easily influenced, then the devil has control over your mind. And I think just hearing that made me like take this a lot more seriously, because I was like, no one can have control over my mind. Like, no, that doesn't sound right. So
and she literally
there
wrote a
you
book,
go. There
Battlefield
you
of the
go.
Mind, and she frames it as like
Yeah.
our constant battle with
Hmm.
ourselves and the enemy, because that we don't think of it that way, but that very much is what it is. Like you
Yeah.
just perfectly framed it. If you're always late, you know what I'm saying, that's something that brings on anxiety. You know what I'm saying? There's a extra feeling of that that brings on anxiety. Like my mom told me one time, she was like, being on time sometimes just gives you a
Yep.
sense of peace.
Yep.
Like I know that I've
Hmm.
arrived on time. I'm not rushing into whatever I'm doing. And she was like, so sometimes, because I used to have a struggle with being late all the time, and she's like,
Yep.
that running, that's giving you anxiety. That rush of like you're late and you have to run in there, and then now you're going in there and you're feeling some type of way, and you can't operate as yourself because now you're feeling like
I think it's
everybody's
so
looking at me because
critical
I'm
so
late
that we
or
can
whatever the case
operate
may
as our
be.
best selves, because like these are little minor changes that we can make for us to operate as our best selves. I struggled with being late all the time, and it used to get me so mad because I was like, I get everything else together, but I just can't for the life of me be on time. And it had to do with preparation,
Yeah,
understanding myself, getting a hold of my schedule, setting up boundaries, using tools that I know that are conducive to my growth based on knowing who I am and what I need to thrive from those little disc profiles. So it's like, if you don't want to be vulnerable, okay, fine. If you don't think your relationships are suffering, okay, fine. But if you want to have a heightened self-confidence, or more success in the workplace, even, I would say that you should look into emotional intelligence. Like it affects so many different areas of our life.
I would agree. So I'm hoping this is the last question, but I kind of want to use this opportunity to share tips and tools, tangible things that our listeners can take with them as they seek emotional intelligence. What are some ways that we can make sure that we're emotionally
Okay,
healthy?
so journaling, we've both discussed that, and saying how much that has helped our journey. So I think that number one, grab a journal. Number two, practice gratitude. Um, Gratitude, I think, is what keeps
Oh,
you afloat, even when everything is sticky around you and you feel like you're being pulled under. Um, I had a gratitude jar, where I would write down everything I was grateful for every single day, for like 2 years when I was trying to. That was like, I think when my depression was at its worst, and I would literally be grateful for like. Uh, we have loonies in Canada. I don't know if you guys have those, like a coin, money, like a coin that I found in my pocket, like a penny. I would be grateful that I found that in my pocket. And that falling asleep with that energy, similar to saying your prayers before bed, um, is allowing like work to be done in your subconscious mind as you're sleeping, and you wake up in a better space as well, and then you maintain that energy. You might wake up in the morning and then maybe think what's one thing that I would be really grateful for if it happened today, or what's one thing I can do today to make today great. So framing your day in the morning is important, using that same journal if you'd like. And then at the end of the night, I think it's critical as well to either decompress what has happened on the day prior, and then finish with gratitude no matter what. There's always something you can be grateful for because you're still alive and you have the opportunity to see another day. So gratitude is critical, journaling, more tangible tips. I like spending a lot of time with nature. That depends on where you are in the world and what the climate's like, but I spend a lot of time by the water, or I'll go for a walk. I think that's amazing for
Here.
turning the world off, the social media world that can be so loud, like putting your phone on airplane mode, DND, and just hearing your thoughts and connecting with your creator. And who you are at your core. I think that's underrated for us in this day and age. We have everything accessible to us online, and we forget that like there's a whole world outside of us for us to explore and connect with, that we can learn from as well, because the seasons are always teaching us things about transitioning and growth, and ways that we can apply that to our own lives. So I think those are like 3 or 4. I hope those are valuable tips. Sorry, one last one is music. I have playlists like for everything. Um, Curating like even instrumental playlists that can help you shift your mood are critical. So at work, I usually work by myself, so I have the opportunity to just close my office and put on a playlist. If I notice that my feelings are hurt, or I'm in a weird space, I'll put on something to play in the background to shift my mood. And just, I'm not sure the scientific reason behind it, but I do know that music can speak to us and definitely change and affect our moods. Hence why pastors start with praise and worship before giving us the word. They're trying to ready our minds to receive
In the
um,
spirits,
whatever they're
yes.
gonna implant on us afterwards. So that's really helpful, I find, for shifting my mood also. So yeah.
I love those. Those are all very amazing, Danielle. I think if I were to share some, I would say first, when it comes to emotional health, understand that this is something
Yes.
that you have to want for yourself. Um, it's going to be fun at times and it's going to hurt at times, but understanding first that it's something you have to want for yourself and that you have to pursue for yourself. And there are so many ways to tackle emotional health. So figure out what avenues work for you. So I would say if you think that you do need assistance or you need guidance in this and it's not something that you feel like you have enough strength to do by yourself, then maybe you
Not
want to
even
seek
strength.
therapy.
I sorry, I
So
don't want to
finding a
interrupt your thought, but I
therapist
want to
that,
say it's not about strength. It's more so this the capability, the capacity, and the know-how to handle these really heavy freaking
yes,
feelings.
because
Yeah.
it's not as easy as we would assume. It's not as easy as sitting down and, oh, I'm
Yeah,
going
no.
today I'm going to become emotionally healthy. It's
It's an
a
ugly
journey.
journey at first too, to be quite honest.
It's a journey. Oh my gosh, yes. And like I said, like
Hmm.
it's not always going to feel the best because you're coming into agreement with things that you might have, you might not have known about yourself or you might not have
Yes.
explored in this way. So I think that if you need that extra help, then I always say try therapy. I've had friends who've, I have not yet myself tapped into that, but it's something that I want to do very soon. But my friends who have explored it, therapy has really changed their perspective and their mindset and has reestablished peace because now they have a better sense of self.
Hmm.
Not that the
Yes.
person helped them to
Yep.
do it, but
Yep.
talking through those
Yep.
things and understanding themselves is what helped them to do that. So if you're taking out the concept that I'm about to have someone help me, it's less of that. It's more so of what that person is able
How
to facilitate for you that you could not have. you
I want
didn't
to share
have
my
the capacity
experience.
to
I know
do
that
for
we're
yourself.
almost done. Just want to share my experience with therapy really quickly. It began this year. I was opposed to it my entire life. Was very self sufficient and of the mindset that what about your schooling can allows you to tell me about myself. That was my mindset. Just because you have the degree doesn't mean that you know my life in particular. So I was very opposed to it, and I struggled because of that. But this year, at the cusp of COVID, I actually looked into therapy because this year has been heavy, and I foresaw that it was going to get heavier, and I didn't know what to do with these new emotions. So I checked in with my therapist, and in our first call, or I think maybe the second after a consult, she was trying to understand my needs, and she's like, "It seems like you've done the work, and I honor that. And I would only suggest for you to continue these sessions just as a check-in, just to make sure that everything is still working the way that it should. But there was none of the oh, I think you need to fix that, or her pointing out all my areas of inadequacy. It was more so her reassuring me with the work that I've done that I'm on the right path, and that in itself was super confirming, because I'm getting this from an actual therapist, that the work that I've done on my own was sufficient. So I do agree that it's the check-in. It's not somebody to tell you about yourself or make you feel bad or uncomfortable all the time. They might just be that sound voice to say, yes, you're doing a great job. Yeah.
I would agree. One of the major things that I agree with as a tangible option towards
Yes.
seeking emotional health was
Yeah.
gratitude.
Yeah.
That is one of the sole
Yeah.
reasons why I stand on my 2 feet. Being grateful and living in gratitude for all the things that God has done for me, even in the midst
I'm
of
telling you.
this crazy year. It has been a crazy year. That I cannot deny.
Yep.
But God has blessed me beyond measures in this year alone in ways that I'm like, wow, I can't believe that He did this for me in the midst of all of
Well, the
this.
thing is,
Or
he's
how
doing
is
it
this
for all of
happening in the
us.
midst
It's
of
just
all of
that our
this?
mindsets might not
Um,
allow us to see it.
you know,
Yeah.
and that's the thing, it's really allowing yourself to see it, because another thing that we do and make the mistake of doing is asking God
Yep.
for
Yep.
answers and then not listening for those answers. So one of the other things that I would come into agreement with you about is spending time, and you mentioned spending time in nature,
Yes.
but spending time in silence. That was
Mm-hmm.
something that's something that's is so overrated. Like people talk about meditating, and for me, I'd be like, there's no way I'm going to be able to focus in silence. So then I figured out how to modify that
Yeah,
for
I
me.
can't either.
So I can't do the silence. So like you said, it just doesn't work for me. And that's just me. Some other people might be able to do the silence. I can't do the silence. So I will
Yes.
say, hey, Google, play creek sounds.
I call them my spa
So
music.
I'll have that sound of the rushing water in the
Yep.
background, and it's
Mm-hmm.
beautiful, and it gives me a nice sense of peace. And then all of a
Yeah.
sudden, I can hear
Yeah.
from him, and I can sit and write in my journal, and I'm like, oh wow, like this is what I needed. But it's taking the time to figure that out for yourself. So I think my biggest thing in closing would be to encourage each of you to take enough time to figure out what are the spaces that you
Yeah.
function best in emotionally. Visit those spaces as you explore emotional health, because that's going to be the space that you're going to be able to thrive in. Um,
Thank you so much,
so
Sean.
thank you again, Danielle. This has been an amazing conversation. Again, I want to thank you for your transparency in this conversation and sharing, because, like I said, there are people who are going to listen to this and they're going to be able to say, me too.
For sure.
Or they're going to be able to say, I can too, or whatever the case may be based on the stories that you and
Thank
I
you for
have
having
shared
me.
today. So thank you so much for that. Before we leave, I have to have you share with everyone how we can stay in contact with you
Okay,
and
so I
abreast to
am
what
on
you're doing.
Instagram at Danielle Glow Up Coach. I'm on Twitter at Glow Up Coach. And my website is UYOU Beta BETTA glowgirl.com. I'm getting ready to launch my one-to-one coaching program that I'm really excited about. Everything is on my website. I have my writing on my
Yay.
website. You can see how I wrote through the pain and transmuted it into power. And then I have a podcast by the name of Refill by YBGG, available on all platforms. But all of this is on my website, so I'd love to connect with all of you.
And all of this information will be in the description box for you all to find and continue to follow Danielle on her journey. Um, as we close, one of the things that Danielle said that I would like for you all to take in this upcoming week is create a gratitude jar. Find an empty, whether it be an empty box in your home or an old mason jar that you have. Grab that and maybe a piece of paper or some note cards and just write down a couple of things that you're grateful for each day. I think that this is a great step toward emotional health. And I'm so happy that she was able to recommend this. So, listeners, I encourage you to find ways to practice gratitude in this upcoming week. We're so thankful to have you. And as always, continue to practice freedom. Have a wonderful day.